Just wanted to do a follow-up on my abortion video. Now, uh, one of the reasons I was hesitant to do an abortion video is because it's one of maybe two or three issues that is hotly debated in the rest of society, but not really that much in libertarian circles. Um, Another one would be like gun control. Gun control is debated throughout society, and it's not something that libertarians really debate much about. And so, I mean, I care about gun control, so I've made lots of gun control videos, but uh, abortion is something that is debated perennially all the time. Whenever you're going to have any kind of political debate, it's going to come up. Although I think that, like most things that are debated at the political national level, especially, it's just a whole bunch of political posturing and rhetoric and little to no substance. And this is the case with both political parties. Now, there are organizations specifically geared toward the issue where this is less the case, but I did not think that it was that divisive of an issue for libertarians. But judging by the fact that it took about 1 hour for that video to get more comments than any other video I've ever made, which is a relative thing. My videos don't get tons and tons of comments. But just, of all the things I've put out there, I've never had anything just draw that much. And it was mostly good discussion. There wasn't anything outrageous or anything in the comment section, but just it draws comments and debate. And it looked like, I'd say a majority of the people commenting seemed to have been on the more or less the pro-life side, which I thought was interesting because in all my reading of overt libertarians, they are not unanimous, but close to unanimously pro-choice. I mean, I can think of exceptions. Ron Paul is one. Napolitano is another. And I would suspect that some of the earlier proto-libertarians, like Albert J. Nock, kind of strike me as religious enough that maybe they were, but I haven't read their stuff where they were. I mean, it probably wasn't an issue. Obviously, abortion was illegal for a couple decades until after Nock was dead, so I don't see how he would have ever even written about it. But maybe that's why, I don't know. But I just wanted to bring up a couple more thoughts here. I don't think this will be quite as long as the last one, but the question here is, well, first, one of the objections. A lot of people, not a lot of people, but it was brought up a couple times. Well, the woman may not want the baby. She can demonstrate that she doesn't want the baby. That could be shown by her actions, if not by her statements. That maybe she used contraception. She could even be on record as saying she doesn't want one. And I basically consider all of this to be irrelevant. If the situation of the fetus is one that the fetus had no hand in at all. It is in the mother. It was conceived within the mother, and the acts that put it in that position were not of its own choosing. It did not invade the mother because it didn't even exist. It came into existence within the mother. This is be like saying if someone is born in your house, that they invaded your home. They had no existence outside of your house. The second is if you commit an act, even if you didn't intend to commit the act, you are still liable for it. And I use the example in the video, and I think it's a perfectly valid one. If I injure somebody somehow with my car or some other way, I am not released from moral responsibility or litigational responsibility simply if I say I didn't mean to do it. I mean, this is kind of like the most absurd defense you could make is to say I wasn't intending to hit you with my car, maybe not even something that serious. I didn't mean to hit your mailbox, or I didn't mean to run over your dog, so I'm just going to walk away from the situation. No, if you cause harm, if you cause damage, to somebody and they want restitution, they have a right to seek it, whether you intended to cause the damage or not. So with a woman, and I guess this could also, you could make an argument for a man. I guess it's not what we normally think of, but I guess I don't see how it's that different. The fact that she may not have wanted to conceive a child doesn't matter. It happened. It's not the child's fault. She put herself in a situation where that could happen, unless, of course, she was raped. I mean, if she was raped, it wasn't any decision she made that caused it. But if she was, had consensual sex, even if she uses a condom or spermicide or whatever, it happens, and that means that she can't say, I didn't mean for it to happen, so I'm not liable. I just don't understand. Now, the other thing that kind of bugs me about this whole thing is, where I talked about in the video, I said, well, I'm prepared to consider arguments against the personhood of the embryo. And I'm not an expert, but I know full well, at certain stages, I would not even recognize an embryo as anything other than, it's microscopic at the beginning, but for a long time, it's unrecognizable, at least to the layman or to the naked eye, as a human. But scientifically, it is. The analogies that were used in the comments, I think, are totally unsatisfactory. Just comparing it to, scratching an itch or something and having the cells break off. I mean, people, it's dumb. It's like saying, oh, if you're against abortion, then you think it's a crime to, cut your own fingernails or scrape skin off yourself, and it's totally different. This is my body. This is what do they always say? It's my body, right? It's the woman's body. Well, no, the fetus is not the woman's body. It is. I mean, the fetus has a different genetic code. Once it gets to that point, it could have a different blood type. It has a different brain. I mean, do you think women become two-headed, two-hearted, multi-lunged, multi-brained animal, like a whole new weird species when they get pregnant? No, they have a different individual in them, and it's not theirs in the sense that it's part of their body. It's within their body, and it is attached through an umbilical cord. At some point, when the first cell happens, I'm sure there's not an umbilical cord. I don't know all the stages that well. But that is an individual. Just watch any program, not one that's going to be pro-life or anything, any program about the life cycle of a human, and it doesn't say the woman has a cell in her, and this cell is the baby, and it grows out like a branch off of a tree, and that's how a baby is, and it's just part of the woman. It's not. It's a distinct organism, if that's what you want to call it. But we have scientific classification of organisms on this planet, and the classification of the embryo is not woman A or nothing or amoeba or protozoan or fungus. It's Homo sapiens sapien. Now, and so that would make it homicide. Now, questions about personhood, I'm willing to hear those, but when we this is a question that if it comes down to it, because some of the people were making comments like, well, if this many cells is this level and that many, if there, I suppose that there is a scientific definition of personhood. One does not exist right now. There is no textbook that will tell you a person scientifically, personhood is obtained with blah, 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 blah. This many neurons, this many pathways, this many cells. I've never read it. I've never heard of it. I don't know of any scientists who categorically claim this. On very, very specific questions, we might have answers to some aspect, like we know when they have a nervous system. We know when they have the roots of a brain, and then how big that brain. But we don't know when personhood. It hasn't even been defined scientifically. And so to start blithely saying, well, it's at this point in this trimester, we don't. there isn't even there's not even scientific consensus. There's not even a scientific definition of when that is. And even if there was, it would be very difficult currently, I'm not saying this will always be the case, to even determine when that point comes. And the thing that's so vexing to me about this is if it was ever determined that when it comes down to it, it's going to come down to one neuron firing and one neuron not firing, I think. I mean, if the personhood thing is going to be really heavily related to the brain or mental capacity rather than, the development of, say, the legs or something like that, then the difference between a person and a not person is literally one neuron firing. And the thing there is that line is so fine, because I'm assuming that at some point, in some way, that will be definable. It's not now, and it cannot be determined now, which is a big reason to be hesitant about being flippant about killing something that you're not really even sure if we can define it as human. But anyway, the difference between the non-person embryo and the person embryo, assuming that we've established a standard of neurological personhood, is literally one neuron firing. Okay? And it strikes me as very disturbing to be eager to endorse destroying the one and not the other. Here's an analogy that I think is fairly apt. Another area where there's similar vagueness scientifically when it comes to personhood, it's on the other end of the spectrum, and that's at death. Death is not as simple as most people just assume. Clinical death. Is it when your heart stops? Well, no. Sometimes people have their heart stops for a long time and they survive. Is it when your brain activity stops? Well, brain activity has gradations. I mean, is it firing 100%, or is it dead and it only goes? Does it just decrease a little bit, and that means you're dead, or did you literally have to have a vacant skull cavity? I mean, you have rigor mortis, you have all these different stages, and it's not even. It would be very hard. Like, they give a time of death, but you have to realize there's exactly at what precise moment physiologically did the death occur? And this is what I think is odd. We can agree then that if somebody is dead, it is not a crime, or at least it's not murder to start stabbing the corpse. We might argue whether that's some kind of desecration or whether that should be a crime or not, but it's not homicide. If I come to a corpse that is without question dead, and I start stabbing it, I'm not guilty of homicide. It's not murder. But how? Wouldn't it strike you as very odd if there's somebody laying in a hospital bed, they're close to death, and there's some ambiguity as to whether they're dead or not, because it's just, and someone's just standing over them with a knife, just going, "Oh, I'm going to stab this guy so many times, but he's going to be dead, so it's not a crime." And then just, I mean, wouldn't the humanitarian, even in a secular sense, if not a religious one, stance be we should try and value that person's life and sustain it, and not be jumping all over ourselves to not kill it, I guess, but to classify it as dead so we can do whatever we want. And of course, there's a whole moral hazard thing there. I mean, yeah, what if Grandpa is on his could be his deathbed, and his inheritors, show up and they all hope that he dies? I mean, that's disgusting, right? Well, I mean, that just strikes me as very, very macabre, and yet I see it as exactly paralleled with the fetus in the mother, the to be aborted fetus. We've got all these people who agree homicide's wrong, killing a person is wrong, blah, 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 blah. They can't define a person in any satisfactory way. I mean, every And yet they are willing to be so callous at the possibility that the life form, if you don't want to call it a person or human, in the woman, they're callous about killing it, and they just compare it to parasites, vermin, mosquitoes, aggressors, and they just, oh man, and this is why this debate becomes so acrimonious, because on one side you have people who basically, the pro-life people who, like myself, are going to just have to conclude that it's homicide and infanticide, and might be even worse than normal infanticide because they're literally innocent. You know, even if someone's not guilty of a crime, most people who are alive and volitional have done, jerky bad things, and you might say, well, they shouldn't have died, but, he was a jerk. You can't say that about an embryo. Might say that his rapist father was a jerk. Can't say that about the child so conceived. And yet, so you got that side, and then the other side, I don't understand, because the pro-choice people are never like, it's very serious, we want to be very careful about human life and the sanctity of life. I don't hear that. I hear, it's just a blob of cells that needs to be extricated so the woman can not have her life impeded upon. Well, if that's the argument, who cares if it's in the womb or not? I mean, it's a lot easier to take care of when it's in the woman. Then it doesn't cry, and it doesn't need diapers, and it doesn't consume as much food. And here's the whole thing. Every argument that I've heard for personhood, other than arbitrary ones that just say after birth but not before, they apply to birthed babies as well, like the dependents. Or it's attached to the mother. That's probably the most absurd one. So it's not a person because it's attached to the mother. Okay, so let's say she gives birth, the baby's out, it's still attached to the umbilical cord, and the hospital attendant coming with his scissors to cut the umbilical cord, and then at the last second just starts stabbing the baby. And now I'm not saying that's likely to happen, but would the person who makes the dependence claim or attached to the mother claim go, oh, well, it was attached to the mother. That's no different than if it popped a zit. I mean, that's the principle of the argument there. That's the actual logical conclusion of the it's attached to the mother or it's dependent on the mother argument. And, like I said, dependence, humans, this is an interesting evolutionary fact. Humans are born very premature, at least relative to other placental mammals. Marsupials are born like, as grubs, basically. But placental mammals typically are born almost fully functional. If you just watch any show on the Discovery Channel and they talk about wildebeests or rabbits or lions, and they're small, but within a couple hours, even a couple minutes, they're able to run and walk and nurse and eat, and they're not as smart as humans by far, but they're developmentally, their brains are capable of coping with the world around them. They're able to interact with their mothers and sense danger and all that sort of stuff. Okay. Human babies are born very premature, and it has to do with the fact that we're bipedal and we have huge brains, and the birthing canal is not wide enough in a woman to allow a developed human brain to come through there, relative to like a normal animal. For that to happen, her pelvis would have to be like way wide, and she wouldn't be able to walk. And so humans are born developmentally premature relative to other placental mammals. And so that's why the childhood of humans is a lot longer, not just, we say it's this modern thing, but I mean, it takes years and years. And all these developmental arguments, the born baby and the preborn baby, there's a moment there, but there's very little difference. We were talking about things about like personality, the ability to recognize self and others. Those are not present in newborns. In fact, a lot of that stuff, it starts coming, but that's a process that begins in utero. And to really have clearly individualized people, you're talking about toddlers or older. And so this whole logically, all this stuff about personhood and whatever, it would not only apply to in utero. It would apply to newborns, even up to toddlers. And there's a couple abortion advocates who actually admit that. I don't know his name, and I've always heard about him. So maybe it was apocryphal, but I believe it was sincere. Well, he said, yeah, he wouldn't want to put a date on it, but maybe 4 or 5, something like that. Now, I realize most of them don't make that argument, but if your argument is it's ruining the woman's life or whatever, then why wouldn't you make that argument? I mean, it's ruined her life more when it's a 4-year-old than it is when it's just in her belly. Or not literally her belly. But anyway, what bothers me about it as a secular person is that it's not deferential enough to human life to me. That there's just this willingness and this even eagerness to destroy a life form, a Homo sapien life form, without any rigorous justification whatsoever. I mean, I understand the whole it's not very big, and I know that. But at some point, when's the point when it's big enough? And if you can't tell me, then how can you be so certain that now is the time? If you can't tell me that it's, like I said, taking back to the other example, if you aren't sure that somebody's dead, if you can't tell me that yes, now he is dead, then don't, go. I mean, just see someone going around going through a hospital, I don't know, using these corpses as target practice or something, or harvesting the organs from them and saying, well, are you really sure these people are, I don't know, whatever. Can you ask them, can you prove to me when these people are actually dead before you're, chopping out their livers or whatever? It's just at some point, whatever. Wouldn't that strike anybody as unbelievably macabre and moral hazard and whatever? And this, someone brought up stem cells. Listen, that's a different issue, but in the sense that who cares? No argument about the efficacy of using them for scientific research matters when there's a moral argument of whether you're killing a person. We could learn a ton if we could just grab people off the street and give them vivisections and cut out their organs. And we could make all kinds of arguments about, skin grafts and blah, blah, blah. But we don't. Nobody advocates that because it's morally wrong to go around killing people just to benefit science a little bit. And that's the same argument, as far as I can tell, with the stem cells. Now, I'm not an expert. It's my understanding that you can get stem cells. Maybe they're not as good, but you can get other kinds that don't involve killing somebody. If the question is whether the embryo is a human and has human rights, and whether killing it is a homicide or not how useful is it to science. That's not a question. We know that it would be useful for science. Just as we know cutting out any living person and chopping them up would be good for science. The question is that ethical or moral to do that? And we just want to skip that question. And this is a tactic that is explicitly used by the pro-choice movement, and that is evidence in every comment I ever get about it, is a very concerted attempt to frame the argument away from the personhood, or at least the potential personhood. Again, I'm willing to hear debate on this, of the embryo. And so it is never called a baby. Other terms are used: fetus, embryo, parasite, glob of cells, right? We're all sacks of organic material, We're animated. Guess what? I mean, fucking embryos are amoebas are animated. It is alive. And it is an individual human being, and I use that term broadly for those of you who are skeptical, and I am very, very hesitant to endorse killing it without a justification that would surmount, in any other situation. If the mother is going to die because there's something wrong, I'm okay with that. But again, and this is what the guy who got me into all this in the first place said, shouldn't the emphasis be on trying to save them both? Just like the sick person in the hospital, shouldn't the emphasis be on trying to keep them alive instead of debating when the first second is that you can, cut up his organs and dispose of his estate to his heirs? Isn't that morbid and wicked? And it's not the best term to use, but shouldn't the emphasis be on life? And this is what I think is, even if we could assume that, well, they don't look like humans and we're not going to lose any sleep about it and whatever, I think that it denigrates our humanity and our morals. And this is something actually Paul mentioned in the debate, that it's the moral fiber of society is degrading. And it's interesting because, unfortunately, lots and lots of the pro-life people already are morally pretty degraded because they're bloodthirsty. They're more the way they watch these wars is the way Romans would watch Christians being sacrificed in the Colosseum. I mean, a lot of them. It's not 100% parity, and that's the problem with that. But then you got the atheists, and they're just shrugging their shoulders like it's all right. I mean, that's what bothers me. If there was a society that would not abort fetuses and that was worried about that it was bad, I would feel more comfortable in that society, because I would feel like, as at the stage I'm in, I'm less likely to be aggressed against in that situation. But if we're in one where we're killing the babies, the embryos, and we're killing the old people, which government healthcare is going to do. I'm not against suicide, by the way. I don't have anything against like Jack Kevorkian or anything like that. That's different. That's a volitional act to end your own life. That's your right. It's also completely unenforceable, and if you want someone to help you, that's fine. But although that wouldn't be a job I would want, whatever. I would feel more at risk in a society that values human life so little, and that is so willing to justify the killing by just using colorful language and say, oh, it's just a glob of cells, it's just a parasite, it's invading the mother, whatever. Yeah, well, then they can just call me a traitor, or a greedy capitalist, or a kulak, or a Jew, which wouldn't be accurate in this case, but I mean, I see them as linked, not necessarily 100%, and that bugs me as well. Aside from the fact that I don't see any other way to conclude that it's anything other than homicide. And if no one on here can give me an exact time where personhood begins, literally an exact time, where saying the first or second trimester is like saying, puberty. Puberty. When does puberty start? When does and with such uncertainty, to be so in favor, it's. I have a hard time appreciating that position.